To them, dying was not the final act of life, it was the quiet crossing into eternity, a passage as natural as the setting of the sun. The desert winds carried this belief through generations, whispering that the soul did not end when the body stilled. It simply stepped into another world, one filled with light, renewal, and endless peace. Each dawn, as the sun god Ra rose from the horizon, the Egyptians saw a reflection of their own promise of rebirth. Just as Ra sailed across the sky by day and braved the dark underworld by night, so too would their souls journey beyond death, returning once again in eternal cycles of life. This rhythm of day and night, life and death, shaped every part of their existence. It was not something to dread, it was destiny, beautifully woven into the order of the cosmos. In villages along the Nile, people prepared for the afterlife in small but meaningful ways. A farmer might offer part of his harvest to the gods, whispering prayers for safe passage after death. A craftsman would carve tiny statues meant to serve him in the world beyond. Even the poorest Egyptian dreamed of eternal life, of walking once more under golden skies where the Nile's waters never ceased to flow. To die without proper rituals was to risk being forgotten, to wander the shadowed lands without rest. So, they lived mindfully, guided by the principle of mat, truth, balance, and harmony. Every action, every choice, every offering was part of a greater preparation. The Egyptians believed that how you lived shaped how you would awaken after death. The promise of eternity gave their world meaning. It softened the grief of loss, for no farewell was truly final. The dead were not gone, they had merely stepped into a brighter, everlasting dawn. And in the flicker of oil lamps during funerary rites as priests murmured ancient prayers, the living could almost feel the thin veil between worlds, the calm assurance that their souls too would one day rise like the sun. As a person approached the end of their earthly life, preparations for the afterlife grew far more deliberate and intimate. Families, priests, and artisans would gather to ensure that every spiritual and physical need was met, for the journey ahead was long and filled with trials. The Egyptians believed that the soul was made of several parts, the ka, the ba, and the ak, each needing protection, nourishment, and proper rituals to remain whole. Without these, the soul risked becoming lost, unable to pass through the gates of eternity. One of the first steps in preparing the deceased was the act of purification. The body would be gently washed with water drawn from the sacred Nile, the river they believed connected the realm of the living with the world of the gods. This washing was not just cleanliness, it was symbolic rebirth, a way to cleanse the soul of the dust of mortal life. The attendants performed this task with quiet care, whispering small prayers, asking the gods to guide the person safely into the next world. Once cleansed, the body was anointed with fragrant oils, cedar, myrrh, and lotus. These scents were chosen carefully, each believed to carry protective properties. The fragrance drifted through the chamber, weaving calmness into the air. It was said that the gods themselves favored these aromas, and that by covering the body in them, the deceased would be welcomed more gently into the presence of divinity. As family members stood nearby, they often brought personal items to place beside their loved one. A favorite charm, a piece of jewelry, perhaps a small carved figure. These items carried emotional weight, reminders of the life lived, and symbols of the bonds that would endure, even after death. For the Egyptians, love did not fade with the last breath. It accompanied the soul down every corridor of the afterlife. Before the more complex rituals could begin, priests recited sacred words known as utterances, ancient phrases passed down through centuries. Their voices echoed softly in the dim chamber, calling upon protective deities like Anubis, the guardian of embalming, to watch over the body. Each word was believed to strengthen the ka, ensuring it remained connected to the body so that the soul could return to it in the afterlife. This early stage of preparation was both spiritual and tender, filled with the belief that death was simply the beginning of another journey. Through gentle hands, whispered prayers, and sacred rituals, the Egyptians created a bridge between life and eternity. As the days of preparation continued, the most intricate and sacred work began, the process of transforming a fragile human body into a form capable of withstanding eternity. This was the heart of mummification, a practice refined over thousands of years, rooted in deep spiritual meaning rather than simple preservation. Priests wearing jackal masks to represent Anubis entered the chamber, their presence signaling that the ritual had entered a higher stage. The air grew quieter as they prepared their tools, each one crafted with precision and blessed before use. The goal was not merely to preserve a body, but to create a vessel strong enough for the Ka and Ba to reunite with in the afterlife. The first and most important step was removing what the Egyptians believed would decay quickly and threaten the body's stability. Carefully and ceremonially, the internal organs were removed and treated separately. The liver, lungs, stomach, and intestines were each washed, dried, and placed in their own canopic jars, vessels protected by the four sons of Horus. These jars were not just storage, they were guardianship. The Egyptians believed that each organ held spiritual significance and needed protection to ensure the individual's wholeness in the afterlife. The brain, considered unnecessary for the next world, was removed gently through the nasal passage using slender metal hooks. Even though this step can sound unsettling today, it was performed with solemn dignity, guided by the belief that the heart, not the brain, was the true seat of memory, judgment, and emotion. The heart was left untouched within the body, shielded by divine protection, for it would be needed later in the hall of judgment. Once the organs were secured, the body was filled with natron, a naturally occurring salt mixture found along the Nile. Natron purified the body and slowly drew out moisture. For 40 days, the body rested in this state. The chamber quiet, except for the occasional whispered visit from priests, checking the progress. Over time, the flesh became firm and dry, a transformation the Egyptians considered almost miraculous, a physical sign that the person was preparing for rebirth. After this period, the priests returned to remove the natron and gently clean the body once more. Oils and resins were rubbed into the skin, giving it a soft sheen while adding further protection. Though the body had changed, it was treated with the same respect as before, not as a shell, but as something sacred, a critical part of the soul's eternal journey. By the end of this stage, the body was ready for the next complex ritual, the careful wrapping that would seal its place between the world of the living and the realm of the gods. With the body purified and anointed, the priests began one of the most recognizable and spiritually important stages of the journey, the wrapping. Though simple in appearance, this process was layered with meaning, protection, and magic. Every strip of linen, every knot, and every spoken word carried its own purpose. The chamber was prepared with quiet reverence. Rolls of fresh linen, some finely woven and others coarse, were stacked nearby. Jars of scented oils and sticky resin glistened in the lamplight. A priest, again wearing the black jackal mask of Anubis, positioned himself at the head of the body, a sign that he was guiding not just the mummification, but the soul's passage beyond. The process began with the fingers and toes. Each was wrapped individually, a reminder that the deceased would need their body fully intact to function in the next world. Thin linen strips were wound gently and precisely, sealed with resin to help bind them in place. From there, the priests wrapped the limbs, crossing layers over each other in patterns designed to strengthen and protect. This wasn't just wrapping, it was rebuilding, shaping the body into its eternal form. As each layer was added, spells from the Book of the Dead were spoken softly. These were not grand chants, but soothing, rhythmic phrases meant to guide the soul, protect the body, and ward off dangers lurking in the unseen world. The priests believed that these words were like invisible shields, woven into the linen itself. Between layers, sacred amulets were placed carefully against the body. Each amulet had its own meaning and power. A heart scarab, inscribed with prayers, was placed over the chest to ensure that the heart would not betray its owner during the judgment before Osiris. The Eye of Horus symbol, a sign of healing and restoration, was tucked near the abdomen. Other charms protected the limbs, the breath, and the path ahead. To Egyptians, these were not symbols. They were tools, weapons, and blessings for the journey beyond death. Resin acted like glue, securing each layer and sealing the magic within. The smell was earthy and sweet, filling the chamber with a deep sense of ancient ritual. As the priests wrapped the torso, they layered broad sheets of linen across the body, smoothing them with practiced hands. The process took hours, sometimes days, with each priest moving slowly, deliberately, as though time itself paused for the ritual. When the head was finally wrapped, the priests shaped the features with careful pressure, the nose, the lips, the jawline, so the person would still be recognizable to their soul. A final linen shroud was draped across the entire form, symbolizing purity and rebirth. By the end, the body no longer resembled a fragile human frame. It had become something transformed, protected, sanctified, ready to face eternity. The wrapping was a kind of final embrace, a gesture of love and preparation for a journey that no living person could witness. And now, with this stage complete, the priests would turn their attention to preparing the coffin and the rituals that would guide the soul through the trials of the afterlife. With the body fully wrapped and protected by spells and amulets, the attention shifted to another crucial part of the journey, the coffin and the sacred objects that would accompany the deceased into eternity. To the ancient Egyptians, the coffin wasn't just a container, it was a magical vessel, a guardian, and in many ways, a second body that shielded the soul during its long voyage through the afterlife. The carpenters and artisans had begun their work long before the mummification was complete. Skilled hands shaped fragrant cedar wood imported from distant lands, smoothing each plank with care. Cedar was prized not just for its durability but for its scent, believed to deter decay and provide spiritual protection. As the pieces were joined together, the coffin began to take on a human shape, carved with a serene face that resembled the deceased. This was intentional. The car and bar needed a recognizable form to return to. Once the wooden form was complete, artists stepped forward with brushes dipped in vivid pigments, deep blues, shimmering golds, ochre reds, and midnight blacks. Every inch of the coffin became a canvas for stories, symbols, and divine beings. Images of protective gods lined the sides. Isis with her outstretched wings, Anubis watching over the head, and Osiris standing tall as the ruler of the next world. Rows of hieroglyphs carried ancient spells, written to guide the soul and safeguard it from harm. At the center was often a powerful image of the deceased lying beneath the sun god Ra, symbolizing rebirth and transformation. Gold leaf, carefully hammered into thin sheets, was applied around the face and hands. Gold was eternal, it did not tarnish, and so it was considered the flesh of the gods. To where it was to become closer to divinity, inside the coffin, priests placed protective texts, amulets, and small offering bowls. These hidden inscriptions were not meant for human eyes. They were messages to the gods and to the soul itself, reminders and instructions for the challenges ahead. Sometimes, the interior was painted with the sky goddess Nut, her body arching protectively over the deceased, symbolizing shelter and rebirth in her star-filled embrace. But the coffin was only the beginning. Wealthier individuals were given nested coffins, one placed inside another, sometimes 3 or even 4 layers deep. Each layer added more protection, more prayers, more artistic devotion. Sliding a coffin into the next was like wrapping the body in layers of spiritual armor, shielding it from every danger imagined in the afterlife. Alongside the coffin, craftsmen prepared the grave goods, pottery filled with grains and wine, tools the person might need, and small statuettes called shabti. These tiny figures were servants for the next world, ready to perform tasks on behalf of the deceased so that their eternity could be spent in peace. Jewelry, clothing, combs, and even board games like Sanut were included, reminders that life, in all its comforts, would continue beyond death. Everything had meaning. Nothing was placed inside the tomb without purpose. By the time the coffin was fully prepared, it was no longer just an object. It had become a sacred vessel, shimmering with color, power, and prayer, ready to receive its eternal occupant and carry them to the threshold of the afterlife. Now, with the coffin complete, the priests would move toward the next great ritual, sealing the body within it, and preparing for the ceremonial journey to the tomb. With the coffin prepared and the sacred objects gathered, the time came for one of the most solemn and powerful stages of the entire journey, placing the wrapped body into its coffin and preparing the tomb for its eternal purpose. This moment marked the transition from careful preparation to the beginning of the soul's actual voyage toward the afterlife. At dawn, the priests entered the embalming chamber carrying torches scented with incense. The wrapped body lay still, glimmering faintly with the sheen of oils and resins beneath the linen layers. Around it, the amulets placed earlier were hidden, yet present, each holding its own steady glow of protection. 4 priests lifted the body gently, moving in perfect synchronization. To them, this was not just a body, it was a sacred being, someone standing on the threshold of eternity. As they moved, other priests walked beside them chanting soft, rhythmic prayers. These spells were meant to awaken the Ka and Ba, reminding them that the time to journey was approaching. The coffin waited in the next room, standing open like a doorway into the unknown. Its painted surface seemed almost alive in the torchlight, gods stretching out their arms, protective symbols glowing against deep colors, and rows of hieroglyphs whispering eternal blessings. Slowly, with great care, the priests lowered the body into the coffin. Once placed inside, the figure seemed to settle naturally, as if claiming its rightful space. The priests checked the fit, ensuring nothing was bent or strained. The body needed comfort, even in death, for the Egyptians believed discomfort here could echo into the afterlife. More amulets were placed around the body now. Small protective charms slipped beneath the wrappings or nestled beside the figure. A scroll containing key passages from the Book of the Dead was placed near the hands or along the torso. These words served as a guidebook, offering instructions for every trial the soul would meet. Before the coffin was closed, one priest leaned over the body and performed a quieter, more intimate ritual. He whispered a final blessing, asking the gods to open the roads of the Duat, the Egyptian underworld, and allow the soul to pass safely with light and strength. This was not a dramatic chant, but a soft request, spoken with gentleness and respect. Once the lid was set in place, 2 priests sealed the coffin with thick resin. The sound of the lid closing echoed through the chamber, a hollow, heavy thud that marked the final separation of the deceased from the world of the living. But this was not an ending. To the Egyptians, it was the beginning of something vast, something full of challenges and wondrous possibilities. Now that the coffin was sealed, preparations shifted to the tomb itself. Workers cleaned the passageways, dusted the walls, and repaired any cracks. Artists touched up faded colors in the wall paintings, ensuring that scenes of offering, family, and divine protection remained strong and clear. The tomb was more than a resting place. It was a map and a home, designed to help the soul navigate eternity. Food offerings were arranged on stone tables: bread, onions, figs, beer, and roasted meats, all made to nourish the spirit. Oil lamps were lit, ensuring there was always a glow within the tomb, even in deep darkness. And now, with everything ready, the procession to the tomb would soon begin a final journey through the land of the living before the soul entered the silent halls where eternity waited. As the sun dipped low on the horizon, casting long shadows across the desert landscape, the time came for the most public and symbolic part of the entire burial process, the funeral procession. This was not merely a walk to a tomb, it was a final journey through the world the deceased once knew, a bridge between life and the eternal night of the afterlife. Family members, mourners, priests, and workers gathered outside the embalming house. The air was warm, touched by a faint breeze carrying the scent of lotus flowers and incense. Women designated as professional mourners began their soft, rhythmic wails, not cries of despair, but ritualized expressions of grief, meant to honor the dead and alert the gods that his soul was approaching. At the center of the gathering stood the coffin, now resting on a wooden bier, painted, polished, and shimmering with symbols of protection. It seemed almost alive. Priests with shaved heads and linen garments took position around it, ready to lift it onto their shoulders. The procession began slowly. Leading the way were the 2 mourner priestesses who represented Isis and Nephthys, the divine sisters who mourned and resurrected Osiris. Their presence was symbolic. It reminded everyone that death was not final, that rebirth was promised to those properly guided into the afterlife. They moved gracefully, scattering natron and petals along the ground, purifying the path. Behind them walked musicians playing harps, flutes, and sistrums, their melodies soft and hypnotic, designed to soothe the spirit and calm any wandering forces. The music floated through the desert air, weaving a protective spell around the entire procession. Next came the priests carrying sacred statues, small images of Osiris, Anubis, and Ra. These deities were believed to accompany the soul, ensuring no dark creature of the Duat could draw near. Flanking them were men holding tall incense burners, releasing constant streams of fragrant smoke. To the Egyptians, smoke was a bridge between worlds, a signal to the gods that a new soul was on its way. Then, finally, came the coffin itself. For priests lifted it gently and carried it through the streets or the open desert path, depending on the wealth and status of the deceased. The coffin swayed slightly with each footstep, the sun catching its painted surfaces and making the images seem to shift and breathe. Family members walked close behind, some whispering private prayers, others placing small offerings, flowers, bread, small jars of oils onto the bier as they passed. Children occasionally reached out to touch the coffin, believing it would bring blessings. Adults bowed their heads, knowing that this moment was sacred, a final farewell to someone who would now journey through the mysterious, perilous landscapes of the Duat. As the procession approached, the tomb entrance, carved into rock cliffs or built as a small mastaba structure, the music quieted. The priests paused, allowing the family a final moment to speak to their loved one. These were not loud declarations, but quiet, murmured messages. May your heart be light. May you reach the field of reeds. May Osiris protect your name. Slowly, the coffin was lowered from the priest's shoulders and placed before the tomb entrance. Torches flickered in the dimming light, casting wavering shadows on the carved stone walls. This moment marked a turning point, the last breath of the journey in the living world. Soon, the coffin would be carried inside, and the powerful rituals that opened the doors to the afterlife would begin. Inside the quiet mouth of the tomb, lit only by flickering torches, the priests prepared for one of the most sacred and transformative rituals in the entire funerary tradition, the opening of the mouth ceremony. This ritual was believed to restore the senses of the deceased, allowing them to breathe, speak, eat, hear, and see again in the afterlife. Without it, the soul would enter eternity blind, mute, and powerless. The atmosphere inside the tomb shifted the moment the coffin was carried in. Shadows danced on the walls, illuminating painted scenes of offering tables, gods, and the many trials of the Duat. The air grew heavy with incense, and the murmured prayers of the priests echoed softly off the stone. The coffin was laid gently upon a low platform in front of the painted image of Osiris, the god of resurrection. Priests wearing elaborate leopard skin cloaks, a mark of their high ritual authority, stood in a semicircle around it. Another priest, again in the jackal mask of Anubis, took position at the head of the coffin. His role was to oversee the ceremony, ensuring it was performed flawlessly, for the stakes were unimaginably high. A statue of the deceased, carved in their likeness, was brought forward and placed beside the coffin. It was on this statue that the ritual would first be performed. Egyptians believed that the statue acted as a physical backup, a place where the soul could take shelter if the body was ever damaged or lost. The lead priest dipped a ceremonial brush into a small bowl of sacred ointment. With slow, deliberate movements, he anointed the statue's lips, murmuring ancient words meant to awaken the senses. He then touched the brush to the eyelids, the ears, the nostrils, restoring each sense one by one. The ritual tools varied: a chisel-shaped instrument called the peseshk, a small blade, and special metal rods believed to hold divine power. Every gesture was symbolic. Every word was precise. Every breath was sacred. Once the statue had been awakened, the ritual shifted to the coffin itself. The priest leaned over the face of the wrapped body, placing the peseshk tool against the linen where the mouth would be. Another priest recited a powerful spell from the pyramid texts. Your mouth is opened by Peta. Your mouth is opened by the god of metal. You shall speak before the gods. The words were steady, rhythmic, almost hypnotic. The ritual continued as the priest mimed feeding the deceased with bread and pouring water between the wrapped lips, symbolic nourishment for the journey ahead. Small offerings of beer, milk, dates, and figs were placed near the coffin, each representing sustenance the spirit would now be able to enjoy in the next world. The priestesses representing Isis and Nephthys stepped forward to touch the coffin, reciting soft, mournful prayers that echoed the ancient story of resurrecting Osiris. Their voices blended with the low hum of the priests, creating an atmosphere thick with emotion and divine presence. For a moment, the tomb seemed to pause, as if time itself softened around the ritual. With the opening of the mouth completed, the Egyptians believed the deceased could now speak their name to the gods, cry out for protection, and accept offerings. They were no longer silent. They were no longer powerless. Their senses were returned, ready for the trials of the afterlife. Now that the coffin was awakened and the senses restored, the final stages of burial could begin. Soon, the tomb would be sealed, and the soul would face the long, perilous journey through the dew. With the opening of the mouth ceremony complete, the tomb grew still again, a heavy, sacred silence settling over everyone present. What remained now was perhaps the most emotional and irreversible moment of the entire burial, placing the coffin in its final resting place and preparing the tomb for eternal use. The priests lifted the coffin once more, carrying it deeper into the tomb's central chamber. Torches cast long, wavering shadows over the painted walls as the coffin passed by, scenes of gods, fields of abundance, and protective spells. The artwork was more than decoration. It was a map, a story, a promise. Every painted symbol held meaning, guiding the soul through the countless regions of the duat. In the center of the burial chamber stood a large stone sarcophagus. Its surface was carved with intricate hieroglyphs, spells, and protective deities, a fortress of stone meant to safeguard the body for eternity. The lid was heavy, massive, deliberately challenging to remove. It was designed to keep intruders out and allow the soul to travel safely within. The priests carefully lowered the coffin into the sarcophagus. The sound of wood settling into stone echoed through the chamber with a deep, resonant thud. It was the final time the deceased would be held by human hands. From this moment forward, their journey would unfold in a world invisible to the living. Before sealing the sarcophagus, the priests placed final offerings inside: small jars of sacred oils, a bundle of linen, additional amulets for protection, a few Shabti figures, ready to serve, and a final scroll containing key spells and prayers. These were the last gifts from the living, tokens to support the soul in the world beyond. Family members were invited to step forward one by one. Some touched the stone lid. Some whispered private messages. Some placed tiny offerings, flowers, beads, or small tokens that carried personal meaning. Their words were quiet, but full of love, hopes for peace, for rebirth, for eternal rest. Then came the sealing. 4 priests approached the sarcophagus. Together, they lifted the massive stone lid with ropes and leverage, guiding it slowly into place. As it descended, the sound grew deeper, heavier, until at last it rested securely on top. The echo that followed felt like a door closing, the final separation between the living world and the realm of eternity. But the ritual was not over. The priests moved through the tomb's chambers, placing lamps in niches and adding final offerings to shelves carved into the stone. They sprinkled natron across the floor to purify the space. They burned incense to fill the tomb with a scent pleasing to the gods. They touched the walls lightly, acknowledging the protective spirits painted there. At the entrance of the burial chamber, they placed a protective stela, a carved stone tablet inscribed with warnings to trespassers and blessings to the righteous. It declared that the deceased was now under the protection of the gods, especially Anubis and Osiris. Finally, the torches were dimmed, one by one. The light faded to a soft glow, then to darkness. In that stillness, it felt as though the deceased had truly crossed the threshold, leaving the world of sunlight and breath for a realm of shadows, stars, and ancient gods. Now the tomb was ready to be sealed. The journey through the afterlife awaited a path filled with trials, dangers, judgments, and, for the worthy, eternal paradise. In the quiet darkness of the sealed tomb, the deceased began a journey far more mysterious, vast, and perilous than any walk through the world of the living, the voyage through the Duat, the Egyptian underworld. This was the final story the living could imagine, the chapter they prepared for with spells, rituals, and prayers, yet could never witness themselves. To the ancient Egyptians, death was not the end. It was a doorway. Once the tomb was sealed and the last human footsteps faded, the soul awakened into a landscape unlike anything known on earth. The first moments were disorienting. The Ka and Ba, the twin aspects of the soul, stirred from their resting places. The Ba, often imagined as a human-headed bird, rose from the mummy and fluttered in the darkness, stretching wings made of spirit light. The Ka, the life force, remained close, still connected to the body, but ready to guide the soul onward. Together, they moved into the shadowed corridors of the Duat. This underworld was not a place of simple darkness. It was a vast realm divided into gates, caverns, rivers, and fiery landscapes. Serpents with blazing eyes guarded narrow passageways. Lakes of fire glowed in distant chambers. Silent boats drifted across black waters where unseen creatures stirred beneath the surface. The deceased needed courage, knowledge, and magic to survive each stage. This was why the Book of the Dead had been placed beside them, its spells acting like a traveler's guide and a shield. Whenever a guardian spirit appeared, the soul recited the correct words written on the scroll or painted on the coffin. These spells opened doors, calmed monsters, and protected the traveler from harm. At one gate, a towering serpent, its body coiled like a living wall, barred the way. But the soul spoke the spell of fire and transformation, and the creature lowered its head, allowing passage. At another point, the soul crossed a river in the boat of the night sun god Ra. the waters shimmered with starlight, and the boat passed by fields of reeds and deserts of shifting shadows. In the distance, spirits of the blessed glided peacefully, while tormented souls wandered the wastelands, unable to speak their names. But the greatest trial awaited in the hall of judgment. The soul entered a vast chamber with towering columns and a high, unseen ceiling. At the center stood the scales of Mat, the cosmic balance of truth, justice, and order. On one side of the scale rested the feather of Mat, pure and impossibly light. On the other side, the heart of the deceased was placed, glowing softly in the dimness. The gods gathered: Anubis, the silent guide; Thoth, the recorder of all truth; Osiris, ruler of the afterlife, seated upon his throne; and 42 assessor gods, each watching with ancient, patient eyes. As the scales trembled, the soul held its breath, for this moment determined eternity. If the heart was heavy with wrongdoing, it would tip the scales, and the devourer Amit, a creature part lion, part crocodile, part hippo, would consume it, ending the soul forever. But if the heart was balanced with the feather, light and pure, the soul would be declared Makaru, true of voice. The scales stilled. The balance was true. A warm, radiant light filled the hall as Osiris raised his hand in blessing. The soul had passed every trial. It had survived every danger. It had spoken the truth. It was worthy. With relief, the Ba and Co united, forming the OC, the transfigured and eternal spirit. A doorway opened, and beyond it lay the field of reeds, a paradise of golden fields, clear rivers, fruit trees heavy with sweetness, and gentle breezes carrying the scent of lotus blossoms. Here, the deceased would plough fields that never tired, feast with family long gone, fish in calm waters, and walk under a sky that never dimmed. In the world of the living, the tomb remained silent, but in the world beyond, the soul had found peace, renewal, and eternal life, the ultimate dream of every ancient Egyptian. And so, with the journey complete, the story came full circle. A life remembered, a body preserved, a soul guided, and an eternity earned.